And the few points that I'm going to put across, hence, will be suggestions that should be taken into consideration in trying to get soldiers when deployed in peace support operations, and I hope that is the narrative, or deployed in peacekeeping, to be able to use their skills in killing to protect vulnerable populations, especially children. And I realize that I started my remarks from the middle of my notes, but never mind. So I'll step back a bit, because I've had occasions sometimes to point out that we expect too much from peacekeeping deployments or PSO. And why I say this is very simple. That in normal societies, and Kenya, as we sit here, is a normal society. Uganda, forget about the LRA, it's largely a normal society. Tanzania is. Even Mali, just coming from the brink of that conflict, is normal society. But in all of these societies, especially in Africa, the institutions of the state are fragile. They are weak. That is when they exist. So in normal societies, children are already exposed to a great deal of horrors that should normally happen. Now when conflict comes and further degrades the capacity of these national institutions to protect all of us, then children are even more exposed, to the horrors of war. I also make the point that in normal societies, and I've made the point that the only reason why about 60-70% of all the human and financial resources of the UN are deployed in Africa is because there is no culture of peace. Africans somehow tend to resolve their disputes first through conflict. It's the first choice, to go to conflict or go to war and then pick up the pieces later. And you can see it in Sudan, South Sudan I mean. You can even see it in Sudan itself. Why in 1955, was it, 56? 1st January, Sudan did not decide to resolve its differences, North and South, but chose to go to war for 20 plus years, at the end of which eventually the reality became the reality. And why South Sudan, for instance, decided in recent times not to have resolved whatever political differences there were. So that absence of a culture of peace should be part of the discourse. It is not about changing the attitudes of men and women in society, but actually establishing a culture of peace across the breadth and length of society, so that these institutions, these structures, military, police, whatever, can function effectively. And when conflict sets in, the first objective, overall objective, should be to re-establish a culture of peace, where the society accepts the need to first seek pacific methods to resolve their conflicts. The other point I wish to make is that, and I heard this many years ago, and it came from a colonel, Colonel Gaudens Milanzi, who for many years was the commandant of the SADC Regional Peacekeeping Training Center, in a forum, I believe, somewhere in Europe, made the point that it becomes very difficult in the protection discourse when we disaggregate numbers and we disaggregate gender and say that we need to protect this group or that group or that group. Because protection is holistic. It cannot be divided. It's just like security. Security is indivisible. Now, if you look at security in terms of minorities, in terms of gender, sometimes it becomes a bit difficult. So there must be a way, at least a point to which protection is protection, and protection is offered to all of society. before we now denominate the other groups like children. If from the start the emphasis is placed on protection of children and not protection of mothers, and protection of uncles, it becomes a bit more difficult to protect the children. Because by and large, the children must be reinserted, if that is the right word, reintegrated into normal societies, where parents, I think the African document emphasizes that parents are the normal protectors of the child by virtue of a number of factors that were outlined. We need to accept that war is irrational. So in any post-conflict country, when you apply rational methods, it also becomes a bit more difficult. And protection of civilians is a rational approach to resolving irrational, dynamics in a country. So I think with these remarks, I now come back to where I was, as I said, starting from the middle of my remarks. In the document, I've at least seen the word protocol, the need for some protocols to be established in order to enhance child protection. And I try to contextualize what protocol is. Protocol is not documents. Protocol is a set of tools that could be used in order to obtain or attain certain ends. And I'll borrow from a recent education that I got on TV, that all the energy that is in the universe was created at the beginning of the universe. And anybody who wants access to that energy must go through certain protocols, which we all do sometimes. That you sit and you concentrate on an issue, and all of a sudden an idea occurs to you, and you scratch your head and say, how stupid. Why didn't I realize all along that this was the idea? So, in order to enhance child protection, given the challenge that soldiers are killing machines, and their first instinct is to shoot in order to suppress the fire that is coming from there, and not make a distinction of whether where the fire is coming from is a minor or is an adult. To the soldier, it doesn't make sense. One of the protocols could be positive identification, to inculcate in the soldier that, yes, your purpose is to kill the enemy there. But in modern conflict, intrastate, the actors do not respect international norms and therefore recruit children. And if you've been in Liberia or read about the history of Liberia, you understand what I'm saying. Another one could be warning, which is a bit tricky, because we're told that there are, standoff ranges. So soldiers know what the range of their small arms are and, the other types of weapons are. But if possible, to the extent possible, warn the person to stop firing. Well, this is a different theater. It's not conventional warfare. The third protocol could be to shoot, not to kill, but to disable. Okay. This is an American doctrine. Then, of course, use less lethal weapons. So you don't use a machine gun if a rifle can do the job, for instance. So the fire has to be discriminatory and not just indiscriminate, where you end up killing so many children. If possible, you capture the child. But this brings me to the next point, that frontline soldiers, even among themselves, are trained as killing machines when the fire is coming, not to attend to their own wounded. So if a section is advancing and two drop, the rest of them must keep firing and moving. That is how they are trained. And they are trained that when the fire reduces, they can then attend to them. Or those combat service support, as we call them, the medics and so on, could come and attend to them. So there must be some emphasis on multidisciplinary approaches, which again the report emphasizes, training military, police, civilian, so that each component, like the police says that police normally work in the community, and therefore they must be trained to engage with the children, ask questions, and so on and so forth. That could be another very important part of the protocol. We can still look at the protocol. The document says that there is a tension between the knowledge versus the skills aspects of child protection. Transferring the knowledge and then the skills that could be used or should be used in achieving child protection. And both are two sides of the same coin. The training must also be multi-layered. Multi-layered means that when we were introducing ourselves, if we listen a bit more carefully, we realize that there are individuals here, participants, delegates, who have come from training centers. That is one layer. But there are others who have come from the policy level, regional, and then even continental. Because the regional continental set the policy, like ESFCOM, they give training directives as to what should be trained on before the training centers act on them. There are legal advocates I heard from this corner. All of these different dimensions and levels are necessary. So the Save the Children approach must aim to build upon the training center level down to the regional policy level, ECOWAS. I heard ECOWAS, my brother Kamara, if that is the name, for instance, and then ESFCOM. We need to have a sense of what the minimum standards are that every peacekeeper should know in terms of child protection. In the absence of minimum standards, I think we will not be able to measure impact a bit more carefully. And talking about minimum standards, which is standardization, also brings into the equation the question of harmonization. If we're all doing level 200 political science at any university which has colleges, whether you go to college A, college B, college C, the level 200 course outline must be the same. Unfortunately, the reality is that as you move from one training center of excellence to the other, and you look at the different curricula that are offered for courses, you realize very subtle but significant changes. Going forward, the question of ownership must be part of SCI's calculation. It is one thing to give APSTA 100 Save the Children training materials and say, go and use them. It is another thing as you now go forward to develop the curriculum to identify who your core partners should be, training implementers or training providers, some of whom will be APSTA member institutions, to identify them and make them a part of the process of curricular development and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, the APSTA institutions, whoever they're going to be, will feel that they own the product. Ownership in Africa is a buzzword. And I think Europeans have realized that it is better to work with Mr. Pam in Addis Ababa than to sit as entry led by ZIF in Europe, develop tools and bring them to Africa and say, guys, this is what you're supposed to use. Once again, thanks to the organizers, especially my friend and brother, Francis Onditi, for inviting APSTA, not me, to be part of this process. I wish to assure you that APSTA will be willing and ready to work with SCI. because we're working towards a common objective. And I look forward to further interactions because I'm also here to learn at the end of the day. Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, Generals, Directors. All protocols observed. Thanks a lot.